have here today the Ministry of Transport and Mining, which should have appeared here over a month ago. Unfortunately, the PS had a small accident and they'd asked us to push back the date. We were able to reschedule to today's meeting. Again, as we barely have a quorum here, 2 members, the 2 loyal members who usually are present. Be that it may, we will continue with the meeting. I have communicated to the leader of government business some of the issues that we have had discussions with members on the committee in ensuring that we can have a quorum at a minimum. I have been given the commitment from Member Holness that once we have a meeting that they would round robin. We know that there was no sitting of Parliament yesterday, that is beyond our control. We had set this date for over 3 weeks ago, confirming with the Ministry of Transport and Mining. I know there are some members who said that if they didn't come in for Parliament, especially rural ones, that it would be hard for them to come to a PAAC sitting, which is not at the same time or the day after a parliamentary sitting. We, as chairman, and the committee itself has no control over when the leader of government business will have a sitting. But, you know, we even though we are a committee that has met regularly, we still have a lot of work ahead of us. We have a schedule that we should have gone through at the last sitting, which we have delayed. And when we do raise the schedule when members are not present, we get a pushback because they did not contribute to it. And it is a bit frustrating because even when it is circulated, members do not respond to it. The only 2 members that actually responded to it are the 2 members that are sitting in front of me now. And it is a bit frustrating because we have not been able to move on from where we are for quite a while. I've been getting calls from just the general public, the media, what is happening to the PAAC. And they see it as an important committee in Parliament. Outside of a scheduling challenge, because there are quite a bit of joint select committees that are meeting now, and the times are quite limited. You only have 5 days or really 3 days out of the week that meetings are held. And, you know, so we have to book way in advance to hold a date. Otherwise, it is going to be taken up by another committee. So, you know, to hold the dates and have no agreement on which agency, MDA, to bring is quite frustrating, not only for myself, but the clerk herself and the members. So, again, I'll be speaking to the leader of government business again, because we can't continue like this. It's not productive.
Chair, just to add, I do think you've made a real solid point as it relates to us needing a new parliament, because we physically just don't have the space to meet, among other reasons why we need a new parliament. But I believe in relation to the scheduling, sufficient time would have lapsed for us to just go ahead with what we have. As you mentioned, there are members who have already responded to it, and I think we should just proceed.
Okay. You know, my opinion on a new parliament is a little different, though, member, because you can have a new parliament, and if you can have more staff, but the challenge that you're going to need more staffing, but members will have to want to come to the meetings. That's the first thing. Members have to want to come. And the challenge, even with a new parliament, what you have, we have so few members And what is happening is that, let's use yourself, who may be on 3 or 4 committees, on 12 committees. I am on 3 committees. And it has always been a challenge in how it is that you schedule these meetings, more than one meetings, when it's the same clerk that may be doing the same and the same members. So a new parliament building, yes, it is needed, but I am not so sure that it will help the efficiencies of the meetings itself. I mean, it's a discussion, but we'll have to look at it much more broadly than we are now for it to be more efficient. All right. Members, item 5, the minutes have been circulated. Confirmation of the minutes of the meeting held on May 4th, which was when we had our last meeting. Can I take the minutes as being read?
Just a few things, Chair. So on page 2, under welcome and opening remarks, the second paragraph, the second sentence, I see, I'm not sure if it's a full stop, but there's a red dot there. So I'm just saying we need a full stop there if it is not a full stop, at virtually. On page 4, on the bauxite industry, the last sentence, we definitely need a full stop after targeted. On the bauxite industry. Seeing it?
Where on it?
The last sentence.
Okay.
Targeted, it requires a full stop after targeted. And on the 5th page, on the public sector transformation and compensation, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, the 6th line, she added that the objective was to move public sector wages to market level. Ms. Darlene Morrison pointed out that public sector and not public sectors, so I have to remove the S. And on page 6, the 4th line, starting, she proposed that consideration should also be given to regular performance appraisals is missing. Include appraisals there. I don't have it on mine, no. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right, and that's it.
All right. So can we move
So
further?
move, Chair.
Thank you very much. Member Jackson, thank you. All right, members, we go to item 6, new business, review of report from the Ministry of Transport and Mining on the operations of the Jamaica Urban Transit Company. Let them in, please. Thanks. Morning, PS Hales and team. Let me welcome you to the sitting of the PAAC. I know that we should have had this meeting some time ago, and Dr. Hills had to reschedule. I hope you're in good health, sir. Let me give you the opportunity to introduce your team and to make your opening remarks, and then we can go into the report.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. It's indeed my privilege to be here. I think this is the third attempt, and I trust that we'll have a fruitful and productive session this morning. I'm Dr. Alwyn Hales, the Permanent Secretary, and to my immediate left, I have Dr. Janine Dawkins, our Chief Technical Director, and then I have to her immediate left, Mr. Paul Abrams, the Managing Director of the Jamaica Urban Transit Company. Accompanying us also, we have Miss Hamilton, Deputy Managing Director of Finance and Corporate Planning of the Jamaica Urban Transit Company, and Mrs. George Redway, Operations, Deputy MD Operations of the Jamaica Urban Transit Company, and Mr. Barrington Brown, DMD. Mr. Brown? Yes, for engineering. And also from the ministry is Mrs. Harris McCullough, Senior Director Acting for Transport Policy. Just to say, Mr. Chairman, that the report was submitted in March, and subsequent information was requested, which was also submitted by way of Appendix 2 to the report. And we are ready to field any question. The JUTC is well represented, and so it's over to you, Mr. Chairman.
A motor vehicle accident you had the other day, Mr.
Pardon me?
It was the motor vehicle accident.
That
When you were injured, you were hurt, you were ill.
Oh no, it wasn't a motor vehicle accident. I actually fell, and
I thought the roadway was destroyed.
no, it was a fall at my house. I actually fractured a couple of ribs.
Oh my!
And at this age, it takes a little longer to heal, but it's almost there now.
You're still a relatively young man, you know.
Remember Jackson comparing you to his age, so maybe he's thinking that he's young.
Well, myself and Member Jackson have been around from in the 90s.
All right. Okay. Well, since we're focusing mainly on the JUTC, the final piece of information that you had sent to us, the petrol grants. Before I move on to the JUTC and ask Mr. Abrams to just lead from there. The question on the 25,000, which is the last proposal that the minister brought to Parliament or announced publicly, which are vouchers for the operators of public passenger vehicle. It was announced in March, and just a few weeks ago is when he had, in this House, announced that the portal is now open. Can you say why that long gap between the announcement and the the portal being open? What had caused that gap?
Well, I'm not privy to the processes that goes on in the Ministry of Finance, bearing in mind that is administered by the Finance Ministry, but I cannot really speak to the length of time that it took to get to that stage.
Right, but I figure it would be in the interest of the ministry, basically, since it is one that has to deal with public passenger operators.
Yes, indeed, and we got inquiries from operators, and we did make inquiry of the Ministry of Finance, and we were advised. I don't know, and we did submit data to Ministry of Finance as well as a number of eligible persons. I think part of the delay might have been the time to collect the relevant data, some of which would have come from the Transport Authority. But I am advised, however, that things are moving ahead of pace now, that the portal is open and the applications have come in.
What was the time frame that it will be open for? You have any idea?
No, Mr. Chairman, I cannot say at this time.
Because by your report here, is as of July 6th, we're at the 13th now, only 2,000.
That's a week since.
2,946 applicants have been received, but no approvals have yet been granted. Right. Well, if we could get that additional information. Yes. And the reason why I ask is because of also the other information that we asked, which was on the grants offered in the 2020-21 financial year. Because you have about, what, 33,000 approved license out there, meaning from contract carriage to route taxes to Hackney, about?
Should be. I don't remember the number offhand, but...
Nobody can tell me? What?
I didn't bring those numbers. We were on JUTC.
Well, well, we are... having asked these questions, I would have thought that you would have probably brought someone from Transport Authority. Yeah, a rough idea, PS, how many public transport operators we have out there?
I would imagine, and I don't want to give you a number of the bat, but it should be in the region of 40,000.
Yeah, well... And if it is that, and why I ask is because if it is that in that the grants offered in 2020-21 financial year, you have about, say, let's use 35,000 then as that figure. My memory is about 33 to 35,000, and only 18,000 have or benefited from the grant itself. Mm-hmm. I would imagine that before doing another, it is really to find out why the take-up is not more. It is just basically within the 50% mark, why the take-up was not more before even offering another grant to operators. Because by the reports is that just the difficulty and information coming back, not able to complete, then how is it that we could do it in a way that more could benefit from it? Because even though the minister quoted a number that all operators can benefit, and there's only a 50% or 40% take-up, then I would imagine it would be in the interest of the ministry to find out. Yeah.
I was just about to say, Chair, that I think it would be prudent for the ministry to find out from finance maybe what the issues were in the 2020-2021 disbursement, so that if it is that the ministry could help or assist the operators in any way, then for this tranche, it would be a little smoother. That's what I would...
That is the general point that I'm making, because I know for a fact out there that the operators welcomed it. But there are quite a bit of complaints in how, in the application process. So, I mean, it's good to make grand announcements, but then at the final result, what you get out of it is another issue, and we're not really getting the results out of it, because if you have 35,000 by your indication and only 18,000 actually benefited from it, then you see that there's a problem. So I would recommend that at least the ministry step in and find out, because the Transport Authority falls under the purview of the Ministry of Transport. Go ahead, member.
Chairman, just in support of the point, and which member Hamilton made, P.S., the transportation sector is the Ministry of Transport responsibility, not the Ministry of Finance. They are your stakeholders. The remit of the Transport Ministry is to ensure that you have an effective and efficient transport system. And to the extent that there are economic challenges facing your stakeholders, the operators, which will impact on their being able to deliver that service, it must be a concern of yours. If you could have given the support directly in the ministry to augment their operation, then we'll say fine, but it's coming from the Ministry of Finance. So, hooray, that would celebrate that. And Ministry of Finance, having given the commitment, made the announcement, as the chairman said, it is really the remit of the Ministry of Transport to be hounding the Ministry of Finance. You know, we say we have a join-up government, or we seek to have a join-up government, but even in the joining up, there are particular obligations by each in that joined-up government. Because who the cap operator is going to complain to, or should complain to? You, their ministry. You are their ministry, not the Ministry of Finance. So I'm really, when I read the submission, marked it here, I was really, quite frankly, a bit appalled, because I don't sense a leadership for the transport an interest. In the leadership, the interest would drive that. So I was really, I just say all of us concur on it. You have to, when I say your ministry, have to play a more proactive role. You should be coming here asking for our support to let the Ministry of Finance deliver on it. And we'll be obliged so to assist you.
Point is taken, and we did not sense any reluctance on the part of the Ministry of Finance. But given the interest in the matter and the fact that the transport operators are our stakeholders, we undertake, Mr. Chairman, that we will engage the Ministry of Finance to see how this matter can be expedited.
And Dr. Hales, it's really to just ensure that it works, because reports coming out of this first tranche that from last financial year is that TRNs, bones, there's some simple things, and it was really just a frustration of some of the operators that they just gave up on it. The ministry has the money. I'm sure the ministry would love to do something else with the money. But if you have carved out a set of funds for the operators themselves, and as members, is saying is that just a reminder, if you have forgotten, that the Transport Authority falls under the Ministry of Transport, even though you have an executive director or a managing director there. It is still for the interest of the ministry, the parent ministry, to ensure that this works. And that's why when asking for the question is just really to see what happened, because I heard numbers banding around of how many persons benefited from who did not. And getting these numbers from you showed you that actually it didn't, the majority did not benefit from it. So just 50% of the PPV operators.
Chair, I would just ask maybe if the Ministry of Transport could go ahead and ascertain the information from finance as to what the issues were, and we could generate a report, and then we can use that as a basis on which we go forward for the second tranche to see how we would have tackled these issues. And then there is accountability in that respect as well. So at least it can come back to the Parliament so we know that these issues are no longer the issues affecting the sector.
Yeah. All right.
Okay.
All right. Thank you. All right. Sir Abrams, floor is yours.
Morning, everyone. The cost-saving measures provided up to March 2022. Excuse my voice, but I'm just getting over a slight touch of the COVID. Yes. I just returned back to work on Monday, so still getting some after effects from it right now. As of March 22, the closing of the year in March 22, we broke it down into administration, operational cost savings. For administration, we budgeted 9.4, station and printing, and our actual is 3.6 million, a variance savings of 5.8. On the operational side, we budgeted 14.5 for operations, and our actual is 10.7 million, a variance savings of 3.8. With respect to our overtime policy and the payments of overtime claims as of March 31st, 22, actual overtime expense incurred amounted to 88.4 million against a budgeted sum of financial year for 218 million, for a positive variance of 59%, or 130 million. The rationalization of staff continues. The complement continued with the number of moving from 1789 down to 1767 as of March 31st. The optional figure that we believe can operate the JUTC is in the 1800 personnel region. And coming from 2016, we had a staff complement of 2,200. Our total expense have been reduced from 9.99 billion in March 21 to 9.448 as of March 31st, 22, and reflects a year-on-year savings of 4.16 billion, or a positive variance of 31 when compared to the budgeted figure of 13.68. That really gives a quick overview of where we are in our cost-saving ventures, measures as we have to run the operation of JUTC extremely tight, based on the level of challenges we're facing at the JUTC, which has always been an issue over the years. With respect to the procurement of new buses, we await for those to be provided to us, which we are desperately needed for. We're not sure exactly where the process is right now, but we understand that we should be receiving them hopefully by maybe January of next year. If there are any questions, you can go.
I saw the report regarding the alternative, trying to find it seems impressive. The different options lost in the pages there. No, I said it's positive. I don't know if you are saddened by positive things. Go over on the back here. Sorry for that disruption and distraction. Yeah, I found it. These results here, Sir President, is very impressive. 40% less fuel than diesel vehicles, savings of 600 on the Hydro, clean oil, $668.4 million savings. The biodiesel pilot project anticipated 12% reduction, relatively smaller than the rest, but still a savings. Against that background, I see you order those 5 vehicles and you signed the contract in March 31st. Was that contract signed after you had the results from these favorable tests?
The 5 CNG units?
The 45, 45 and 5 are the combination of the new one.
The 45 diesel and the 5 electric buses?
Yes.
What was your question again, sir?
For those 45 diesel buses, was that order placed after you had the test results here? When were these test results in?
You're saying the test results?
Yeah, the one that is reported.
Of the oil filtration?
For the compressed natural gas?
That's the CNG.
CNG, right. And the Hydro clean oil bypass filtration system test that you done. When were those test results in? When did you get the results of those tests that is reported here?
We have had these tests ongoing consistently. And the procurement was done before these results came out.
Before these results came?
No? Before they were initiated, yes.
That means that is this order that you gave, the signing took place the 31st of March, correct? Somewhere in the report I saw that. Which is just a few months ago. And to see why I'm curious.
Can I, Mr. Chairman, just shed some light on this? The results from the Hydro clean oil, those really are applicable to the diesel bus, the traditional diesel buses, to improve to reduce expenditure on lubricating fuel. So they are relevant regardless. In terms of the 45 diesel buses that were purchased, the question came up at the time when they were being purchased because the procurement would have started more than 2 years ago. And we were advised that these diesel buses will actually be able to use the biodiesel fuel. So they would benefit from the biodiesel fuel. They don't have to do any conversion. They can use the biodiesel. And the matter was discussed also, and a policy decision is being taken to reduce or phase out the purchase of diesel buses and to look towards electric and natural gas buses. So these 45 would have been the last in the mass acquisition of diesel buses.
In the case, you could have saved us some concern if you put in the order is for diesel and the CNG buses are used fuel. Because as it is, we only speak to the diesel, hence the concern. So fine, I'm relieved that it can benefit from that test results, those test results that you had.
Just to follow on that point, Chair, in relation to the electric buses, why just 5? Since the pilot that you did was favorable, why just 5?
No, the five were in fact the pilots.
No, but I see you here where you're ordering 5 more, 45 diesel and 5.
No, the electric, the 5 electric are the
electric.
pilot. Yes, they're going to come in now as a pilot. But
It was CNG that were, the 5 before were CNG, not electric, yeah.
But technology has advanced so much that by the time we finish the pilot, in fact, we are now at the stage where we are looking at ordering additional electric buses because I think we have enough knowledge of how they operate and where they can operate. So the pilot will really just confirm some of that knowledge, and we're hoping those 5 electric will come in by the end of the year.
Is there a plan in relation to the electric buses? Like, how many do you want in the fleet eventually?
Mr. Abrams can answer that.
Just to say, sir, that biodiesel is applicable to all diesel buses. All diesel units does not require conversion, can be operated on biodiesel. With respect to the change of the fleet, we have a number of buses that still have useful life. So as we progress and we retire, you would start the transition of the fleet at that point. But whether to say that you're going to change the entire fleet overnight is an impossibility. It probably would take several years to retire older units and bring in the electric or the CNG units.
Totally understand that, but are we preparing ourselves for it, for transition?
I think after the electric, the EV buses are tested, which is basically the same principle we tested the CNG buses, because these technologies are new to the JUTC and to the public transportation system. So we don't know exactly as we didn't know what the CNG would produce on the terrain or how far they could travel, et cetera, et cetera. And through the process of the pilot, we found favorable results from them. The same principle that applied to the EV buses. How far can we run them on the batteries? What level of weight of overloading of the buses would they be able to handle? What level of terrain they can manage? So we have some KPIs which we are developing right now as to following the same principle as the CNG units as to where we're going to test these buses. One may go to the hill routes, one may go to the flats, it just depends. And in truth and fairness to JUTC, when we are supposed to be carrying 60 or 65 people, we're carrying 75 and 80 people. So there is a loading factor also. So these KPIs we're developing will determine what level and how we would move forward into such a new technology of transition.
Can I? Yes, just you have asked about readiness. The CNG plant fueling station already has the capacity to fuel 150 buses. And the pilot for the EVs, those will involve 3 charging stations, which also, in a sense, is putting the JUTC in a state of readiness for the transition.
I saw in your report mention of 450 buses. Is that the full complement?
It is what is required to operate the KMTR. The KMTR, yes.
Sorry.
I know you want to follow, but there's another
It was really a follow-up.
before you.
No,
All right, will you allow the member? Go ahead. No. Go ahead. Go ahead, member, before.
You know, Mr. Chairman,
No,
my colleague needs help. He needs help.
that's why he's in Parliament.
He needs help. But probably needs it outside of here, at Bellevue or somewhere. Further to Member Hamilton's question, with the 450, is with this existing configuration of routes, because on the one hand, I think that there's some talk about rationalizing the routes that you operate. So I think if that should change, then the complement will also change. So while the 450 is the ideal, how does that relate with the routing configuration?
There was discussions on rationalization of routes, but that was born out of the fact of passenger lift on those routes. True public transportation really is if there's one person to be moved in a route, that is what true public transportation is. So rationalization was born out of the discussion that the routes are not productive, and you would take the resources from those routes and place on other routes. So ideally, the 450 is the optimal number that you would run directly in the KMTR without doing any rationalization. But rationalization is born out of the fact that you want to move assets from this route to that route because they're not productive on this route, and that's really not true public transportation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, funny enough, PAAC meeting is one that we ask members from the various government entities to come and give an account of their everyday work. And so very often, John public would be sitting down, watching just to see how many of the agencies we are going to haul over the coal, so to speak. And today we are looking at the Ministry of Transport and Mining, Mr. Chairman. But I want to go back to the document, Appendix 1, that speaks to administration and operational cost-saving measures. And the budget, we see administration budgeted for 9.4 million. The actual thing is 3.6, and the variance of savings is 5.8. It goes to operation, which eats up a great part of your, so I'm going to operation now. Operation eats up all the time a greater part of your budgeted amount. But we are seeing some real saving, Mr. Chairman. My colleague from the opposition bench mentioned that it is positive. And so I would hate that we just glaze over it and John public don't get the feeling that, yes, there is something positive that is really taking place, and we must at this time laud them for the administration of that entity to be showing us this kind of positiveness. Mr. Chairman, even as we go further, you'll see where they had budgeted for 218.4 million for the financial year, and with respect for the overtime, and we do understand how we play with overtime in this country, Mr. Chairman, but there's a positive saving of some 59% of that money. Mr. Chairman, I want to at this time say to the Permanent Secretary and his team to include Mr. Paul Abrams from the JUTC agency that we are very happy, and I am saying it loud for John public who is watching today to say that, you know, funny enough, this is the first time that I'm actually seeing this document, Mr. Chairman.
Remember, you should be ashamed to say that because it was sent out a long time ago.
And I accept all that you're saying, but I don't want you to overshadow the fact that they are doing something awesome at that ministry, that entity, Mr. Chairman. And so today, I take my hat and I bow to you for what you're doing and saying to you, continue in the vein that you are, and we hope that others will follow suit. But Mr. Chairman, whilst that is said,
go ahead.
I just want to ask a question. In your survey or your testing, have we visited any other country that these electric buses have been using, and to see the terrain that they run over? Because yes, we're doing testing here, but it is actually here. So you bring the bus here to do the testing. But have you gone to see, because I know when you go to the developed world, Mr. Chairman, I don't want you to have the member sidetracking you. Please. No, I'm speaking through you to Mr. Abrams.
Go ahead, member.
Your undivided attention.
Go ahead, member.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Have we gone to other countries to see over time how they operate in those countries that they were first used, and to see how much we can tweak it? And as I say, I understand that we're doing testing here, but sometimes you want a comparison.
I think it would be fair to say that Barbados is one of the first Caribbean islands that has transitioned into EV units, and we are in close contact with Barbados as to the results of what these EV units are capable of. In Colombia, Bogota, Colombia, they have the Millennium system, which the majority of their fleet is EVs at this present time, and CNG units. So there is no question that there is a fuel diversification transition taking place in the public transportation system. With respect to the Jamaican terrain and Jamaican operation, yes, although we are in contact with those entities to see what their results are, it really boils down to when we put those wheels directly on the asphalt of the KMTR to see exactly how they do perform. Barbados, for example, is much flatter in its operation than yeah, compared to Kingston, right? And you could drive to Barbados within just like that, but you know. And of course, a lot of this is depending on the loading, because we determine that those buses will come under a lot of pressure of overloading. And that is one of the key things that we have to watch, because if it is designed to carry 50 persons at 150 pounds per person average, and you load it to 75 or 80 persons, you're adding quite a bit of weight to that unit. How does it function and operate under that level of pressure?
When I spoke of other countries, I was speaking of countries such as Brazil, where you know the population is heavy and public transportation is used ever so often. And so you get a feel of the Jamaican feeling where overloading is concerned. Because rightly so, Mr. Chairman, the electric operated buses will come under pressure and you won't get that much life once it is going to be on a continuous basis being overloaded and asking to be carrying that extra load. And so we must now say to ourselves in the testing that we are doing, the report that we are going to be forwarding, that hey, each bus can take 45 persons and no more. That is really what I was trying to get from the situation.
I think some of the feedback out of Brazil speaks to they should have done a slower transition. Barbados, a slower transition. They switched their fleet overnight. So in our aspect, in credit to the JUTC and the Minister of Transport, we always do a pilot structure. And whenever we're bringing new technology into the JUTC, there is always a test phase to see what these buses can do and what they're capable of. And you know, let's not step away from the fact of the savings on fuel that it will bring to the JUTC.
I have a number of questions, but I'm going to follow up on the savings of fuel that you just mentioned. Because in your report, you made mention of, in the biodiesel pilot project, there was mention of a reduction in the fuel cost within this pilot. And mention was made also of a reduction in pilferage. And I wanted to find out if there's a dollar figure associated with pilferage. And maybe for the past 5 years, what has that been? And you know, how have we sought to reduce that? So that's the first question. My member colleague mentioned your savings in relation to administration. And there are a number of areas that you spoke of in your report where there are savings. One such is the reduction in the staff complement. And the reduction, I see from 2016, 2,236, and you went to 1,789, and the updated report speaks to 1,767 as at March 31, 2022. I am interested to know whether the positions that were lost were part of your organization structure or whether they were temporary, and how were separations handled. Also, are there any disputes pending from these separations? And the cost associated with the rationalization exercise, and how many persons would occupy temporary posts? So there's a number of questions, but they all relate to.
To speak to pilferage, the JUTC has had a very big challenge with pilferage from its inception. It is not something we've been able to quantify. We have tried always to try and quantify pilferage, but but it's eluded us, and that's the truth, because you run an operation that's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. So 2 or 3 o'clock in the mornings, activities can possibly take place. It is an item that is highly required out on the road. Highly required on the road, and probably entails quite a bit of collusion in its structure. And it's very difficult for us to put a finger on pilferage, but we have a pretty good idea that there is a substantial figure out there. We just have not been able to quantify that figure yet so far.
I ask because I know from an operation standpoint that it may contribute significantly to the budget.
Yeah.
It would be good for us to have an idea so we know what your actual operations are. Because if there's a significant amount of pilferage taking place, then that is separate really and apart from the operations. So this doesn't give us a true reflection then.
No, it is very difficult to quantify over the years, and previous management teams have had that challenge also, how to quantify the loss of fuel, which is a matter that has been a sore point for the JUTC for multiple years.
Just to pick up from where a member from St. James somewhat left off. Yes, I would like to commend the JUTC in its cost-saving measures, but I also look at it with the view that if you are operating at 50% the fleet that you have, then there ought to be cost-saving measures. And if there was none, then we will be coming here and saying to Mr. Abrams, then there are inefficiencies within the system. So yes, I'm commending Mr. Abrams and the team in able to to have some cost-saving measures, but also just an overall OPS. And I get the impression that the JUTC is not given the importance as it ought to, being an entity that provides transport to the general public and seeing what it is that the subvention that is being given to it on an annual basis. And I've said it publicly that the impression is one, you're basically giving the team at JUTC basket to carry water. The announcement of these buses were made some time ago. Yes, we understand that the whole issue of the coronavirus came upon us, but I would think that at that point in time, seeing that we have a lower run out, being that you only could have seated passengers, that we would have taken that time to do an overall in-depth look into the JUTC itself. One, its operations. Two, its your routes, because we have seen the fleet of the JUTC basically coming down over a period of time. The average age of your buses is about, what, 10 years, Mr. Abrams? About 12 and 14 years. So we have been seeing that aging fleet. And second, I mean, we have been giving them more and more subvention on an annual basis. So my question to you is, from the view of the ministry, which you are the permanent secretary, how are we going to, and what's the ministry's view? Because Mr. Abrams can talk about the operations, but what's the ministry's view or interest in the JUTC in helping them or to reduce? It can't be just about buying 50 buses. You're down to 230 buses when you need a fleet of 450. So to add 50 buses is not going to help the operations of the JUTC that greatly. and it takes about a year to get new buses into the fleet. You would see that you would need more than 50 buses on an annual basis to help to retire some and to get new buses in the fleet to make it more efficient. But when you look at what is happening to the routes of the JUTC, just public order, where is it that the ministry see itself in helping to stem the death of the JUTC itself? Because if we continue this way, that's where you're going. If you can.
Chair, before the PS answers,
yes.
I would really love also a response to my reduction in staff questions.
Sure. Yes.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, I recognize what you're saying, and I do agree that the rate at which the JUTC fleet is being replenished is low. Some of it had to do with policy considerations over the last 5 years, and also, as you mentioned, in terms of the delay in these 50 buses, because of diversion of funds to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic. The JUTC had in fact done some kind of a study, and the ministry is cognizant of the fact that the JUTC over time, over a period of time, is going to need a few hundred buses. And the ministry is now strategizing to see how we can plan for that. And the submission discussions have been held with the minister, and the submissions are being prepared to put that strategy in place. What we have been finding is when we purchase 50 buses at a time, first of all, the 50 buses seem to be considered as a special project, and we go to PIMSEC and we spend months there, and then we go to 50 buses really should be routine annually. So I agree with you where that is concerned. If you are running a certain number of buses, you should be in a position to annually talk about replacing maybe 10%, 8 to 10% of your fleet if you're getting 10, 12 years out of each bus. So that strategy is being put in place, Mr. Chairman, and it's being informed by information that we have gathered from the JUTC and also by the trend that we're seeing out there in the public transport marketplace in the KMTR.
The JUTC itself is in breach of its own license. Because your license mandated to provide between 25 and 31,000 seats on a daily basis. You're nearly half of that. And if it was any other private operator who has a license with the JUTC, with JUTC or the government itself, would be in breach, and I'm sure that the full length of the law would have come down on them. And that is why I mention it in how it is that you treat the JUTC itself. Because just by the public bodies of this year, this financial year, you're looking at, before your bank charges and depreciation, a loss of $8 billion. This is after giving $5 billion in subsidy. So if I was to add the subsidy itself and that $8 billion, you're talking about what? 13? Yeah? $13 billion basically. Because, the accounting, how government does its accounting, it puts this subsidy as a grant or a revenue to the JUTC. But someone who is involved in business, when you're really not taking it from your own sources, you can look at it as an income. So it's about $13 billion. And you're still going to be rolling out less than 50% of the fleet that is needed. And, it is okay to go into the operational part of the JUTC. And that's why I said I want to know from the ministry. Because if it is that over the next 3 or 4 years that the JUTC is not able to expand its fleet, Because as it is now, quite a number of buses, as they go out, they come right back on a record. So you might have 230, but you're operating with 210. Now, is it that we're going to keep the same amount of persons employed? Are we going to keep the same amount of, and I want that to come from the ministry. I don't want to hear from Mr. Abrams yet. I can come down on Mr. Abrams on the thing. Because each budget that is created, when the JUTC, ever since I've been on this committee, when we look at spare parts, they say they want about $3 billion, them get $1 billion. They say they want X amount of buses, and that comes down to policy. It comes down to the policy of the ministry. Hence why I said it's about giving them basket to carry water. And that's why I would love to get something more. And you might can't give it to me now. But what is going to be the policy of the ministry and the administration looking at the JUTC as a going concern that at least 60 or 70% of its fare table can at least take care of its operations and reducing this. Because as a rural MP, when I have to subsidize JUTC in the KMTR and my children, them have to pay full fare when they go into school. It's also a concern of my own constituents. Right? But we see the subsidy going up and up every year, and the operations going down and down. Not only because of the operation itself, but because of policy. So to me, to question Mr. Abrams why I don't have enough parts is really saying why you're not giving him more money to have more parts. You know, so I would love, PS, at least to get some response from the ministry. What is it over the next year? What are the plans? Because we look at these buses, the natural gas project. It was proposed that it would have been 10 buses. We got 5. What happened to the other 5? You know, these electric buses, I would have expected that we would have gotten even the 5 buses long time ago to put them in the system. Not that we're just trying now, after announcing how many years ago that we're going to go that route. You know, so again, it comes down to policy, and I am not satisfied that we are putting enough interest. We're just writing a blank check so JUTC want when they need, and I know that they're not getting everything that they need. So where is it that the ministry, as permanent secretary, chief financial officer of the ministry, from where you sit, where are we going with the JUTC? That's what I want to know.
As I said, Mr. Chairman, the concerns are legitimate and valid, and the ministry is not lost on the importance of the JUTC. You mentioned public order, and in this kind of environment, that is very important. You also even the role that the JUTC played during the pandemic, because it was able to play its part in reducing the rate of spread by being able to transport passengers in a manner that allowed for the kind of physical separation that was necessary. It took a hit, but it was a significant hit in the national interest. The ministry, as I said, is strategizing, and we are putting something together, and within the next few months we should have some clarity. Sufficing to say, though, in the interim, another 20 CNG buses is up for consideration now. You had said 10, it was actually 5, then 20. So we are proceeding.
Stand corrected. Thank you.
Proceeding to seek approval for ordering the next 20, and on similar terms as the first 5. The first 5 was actually supplied by the fuel suppliers, and then the savings, the difference between the CNG and the diesel, would have paid for those buses. And we are getting a similar deal for the other 20 that are to come. I did point out earlier that the plant has the capacity to take up to 100, to service up to 150 CNG buses, and we are looking at that as well to see how we can procure them in the shortest possible time. And we have had interest from the private sector on those. We have also had significant interest on the electric buses, and subject to the pilot study being done, we should be in a position by next year to order some more of those. But we are putting all of that into the package to see how the JUTC can move forward with an improved fleet while improving its efficiency.
When can we look for an overall master plan? You said the discussions are being had right now.
Yes.
When can we look forward to seeing, bringing you back here to hear what that master plan is?
Well, we can give you an update. We can give you an update.
When? By when?
By the end of this year, this calendar year.
All right. Yes, go again, Member Hamilton.
I'm saying my question in relation to staff reduction is still not answered.
Yes.
So I'm waiting.
In request for your information on staff reductions, in 2016 it was approximately 2,200 personnel. As of 31st of March 2022, we're at 1767. There is no rationalization because there was no redundancy. This was done through attrition, through medical redundancy, through early retirement, persons leaving. So as the requests came in, once they fell under the proper format for separation, it was considered, and the persons were allowed to go. So there was no rationalization of redundancy. We never got into that. We allowed the system to separate them as we went along in the years.
So there was no active reduction or active part being played by the JUTC to reduce staff. It just happened naturally.
It is something that we did naturally, but we encouraged certain aspects of the separation.
Were there any particular departments that were impacted more than another?
Well, the majority of staff in the JUTC is in operations. Administration holds a very small percentage, so a lot of the operations, that is where the changes took place. And you know, as the fleet reduced, we also encouraged persons that have been with the company and they're 65, 67, 58, 60. We encouraged in a certain way for them to look at early retirement.
So the 2,236 staff complement that you mentioned in 2016, that was, all those positions were established posts?
No, JUTC has 1,680 established posts.
1,680?
1,680 in the company. At this present time, we probably have about 87 temporary positions right now. But we have been working assiduously with the Ministry of Finance through a post audit to have the positions regularized on the system. But JUTC has had this establishment for back to 2006. So as the company grew, as the company expanded or grew, persons had to come on to fill those needs. And hence, we looked at the operation and came up with a yearly figure as we moved along as to what the optional operating staff really requires at the JUTC.
Clarification. In Appendix 1, you said, it says here that the rationalizing of the staff complement continued with the number moving from 1,789, previously reported, to 1,767. as at March 31st. So if the complement is 1,680, it means that you're way above your establishment. Yeah.
Yes, we're above the establishment.
So it's way above the establishment.
Yeah, and those are filled on temporary positions.
Oh.
So as the company grew or expanded, they had to hire personnel.
But the 1,680 is premised on the 450 bus. What the 1,680 relates to? No, the complement of 1,680.
Yeah.
What does that complement? Because the core of your operation is the use of buses. You employ persons to operate, maintain, whatever it is for the buses to move the passengers. So you have a complement, an ideal complement of 450 buses. My question is that with that 450, what is deemed the corresponding staff complement for that?
Give me 1 second, I can do that.
Sure. Because I have a couple related questions stemming from that answer.
Yes. I know. I always do.
That's why.
If you were to operate a full 450 bus fleet, you would probably need a total of about 2,400 persons.
2,400?
Yeah, approximately based on the international standard of operating. About 2,400 persons you would require.
I know it's not a direct flatline correlation, but for 1,680, how much buses would correlate with 608? No.
Persons you calculate per bus, I mean employed.
It's 2.5. International standard is about 2.5.
Oh, 2.5 per bus.
That's the figure that's tossed around, about 2.5. Okay. So you probably need about 1,125. 16. You just divide, I think, but the 1,680, would be part of administrative personnel too.
No, but I think the 2.5 you gave make accommodation for all levels or all areas, right? Administration, service, maintenance, so just use it.
I would probably think 260 buses roughly in that area. 260? 260 roughly, just a quick calculation.
And you are now at?
1767.
Yeah, that's a compliment. Okay, another question, Mr. Abrams. The report says you have, 2021-22, you had 206 buses rolled out on a daily basis, right? And you have 264 projected for 22-23. That's all? No, that is with the 50 buses added. Okay. There usually be a high level of, what's the term used? Brought down buses.
Defect returns?
Non-functional buses.
Defect returns?
Huh?
Defect returns?
Defect returns. Boy, you have some fancy terms. You have some fancy terms for...
Brought down defect returns.
All of that translating, not working, no good.
That's correct, sir.
I think the term is better than the reality. Sound better. But at some stage in the past, there was a high component of buses you had at the depot that were non-repairable, but they were still counted in your fleet. Of the 260, use 21, 22 numbers of 206. how much of those buses, those are functional buses?
Those are functional buses, yeah.
How much, okay, now bring me back. How much buses you have there that can repair?
We have about 200 buses that fall under border survey for write-offs. We have buses in the fleet that require repair, major repair.
No, don't go to those yet. Come into those.
No, that's the complement of the 200. I can't break down that exactly 200 for you and tell you.
Oh, it includes some that is currently in use.
We have to use our numbers because they're assets to the JUTC. We can't ignore them. So if it's 400 buses in the fleet, for example, and you have 220 operational, we have the balance of the 180 broken down into categories of major repair, minor repair, border survey write-offs, major damage, that kind of category.
I just start with the border survey one. When you went clean them out of the depot?
We have been trying consistently to have salvage companies take them. It's not taken up by people at all. We tend on consistently to have salvage companies take them up.
What is, are you overpricing them?
No, absolutely not. We ask you to make an offer.
You're giving them away because I think that
I can't give them away, but that, you know, we will negotiate because they're written off. They're off the assets.
No, I ask you because when you visit the depot, it looked like a graveyard with a whole heap of these. And for a modern transportation system, yes.
Yes, there are a lot of buses, but each depot has its own fleet.
Yeah.
So whatever is in that depot's fleet remains, it's the ownership of those. So whereas we have gone from 30,000 a bus, but we invite offers. At one point we had good take-up because the price of metal, etc., and scrap was
low,
was going well, and then all of a sudden it fell out. So
no, I just, you know, people stealing equipment in use for scrap metal. I just believe that we have so much over there in this depot that you can't get a buyer.
I think a lot of what challenge that the scrap dealers have is there are so much different components. There are components in the bus such as fiberglass.
Yes.
You know, rubber. So when they're buying a bus, they have to pull that bus apart and extract those items and then they have the challenge of disposing of those items and getting down to the bare metal which they're going to sell. So it's not like just getting a piece of iron on the road and you wait and you sell it. So we have found that a lot of the dealers, scrap dealers, shy away from it.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was curious. The second question is, of this $8.1 billion for this fiscal year in subsidy, how much of it you have gotten so far? And no, in the report I said it says there for 22-23 fiscal.
5.5. We got
5.5 is 21-22.
No, we got 5.5 in total.
Say that again.
We got 5.5 in total.
Already?
No, we got 5.5 budgeted allocation.
For which year?
For this year, yes.
For, no, in the report I'm looking, this is wrong.
Well, just looking from
the one I'm looking at, it says 8.09.
That's the losses.
Oh, sorry.
And the
sorry. No, sorry.
Right.
I was looking at
the
wrong
grant is 4.5.
Yeah, no, okay.
5.5, sorry.
5.5. You got that already?
No, we don't. We get it monthly.
You get it monthly?
Monthly, in a monthly allocation.
Interesting, because I know in many instances, central government usually allocate the amount budgeted for in, say, purchases. So like the bus, for example, they might purchase the bus directly on your behalf, and that will be counted in the subsidy. That is separate?
Yeah, the buses are purchased separately by central government.
From the subsidy allocation?
No. This is our operational
Oh,
budget.
okay. The subsidy is directly for operation?
Direct for administration.
Not capital?
Operation. That's correct.
Okay, thanks.
Mr. Abrams.
I kind of lost you along the way, so.
No, that's fine. I'm going back now to the issue of overtime payment. And when I went through the report, it made mention of greater accountability now being placed on management in relation to that, as well as they're now being approved overtime. So I was curious to find out what obtained prior to now. I mean, how were overtime claims paid? And I would love an idea as to the overtime policy that currently exists.
Prior overtime was paid and approved by certain categories of supervisors. What we did as a policy is we determined that after a certain amount of hours, the supervisors could not sign off on those overtime hours. It had to go to senior management in the depot, and after a certain amount of hours above that, it had to be signed off by myself or senior deputy managing director, senior personnel. So what we did was we broke down the categories of levels of overtime. For example, a charter that would go to from Kingston to St. Elizabeth, that would require probably 14 or 15 hours of overtime for the driver for that charter. That would have to be signed off by the Deputy Managing Director of Operations, who charters would fall on, or the Managing Director. So that could not be signed off by a lower line staff, if you understand me, which that happened prior. So what we did was we took categories of overtime and gave to categories of personnel who could sign those overtimes.
So that is what happened prior. So what are the changes?
That's the changes now.
The change. So I wanted to know what obtained before.
Well, what obtained before was the same charter could be signed off by a charter manager, for example. So we took, if he was in his position, he could sign off for 4 hours, for example. He'd be doing a charter from here to St. Thomas, for example. Anything above that 4 had to go to a different signing officer. Anything above that signing officer would have to go to the DMD or the managing director. So as the hours were increased based on the operation, it would have to come to a senior personnel for signing.
So what is the usual working hours for staff?
8 hours. 8 hours. So
hours.
If, for example, in maintenance, if a shift supervisor does not show up, then the shift supervisor who's on duty would have to stand in for that person who called in sick or did not show up to work. He would have an 8-hour overtime. At that point, it would require signing by the general manager of the depot. And if he had to stay an additional 2 hours too, then that has to come to the office of the managing director or to the office of the DMD for signature.
So the overtime policy now is not really one where persons now work less. It's just the actual amount now, because I see you have a positive variance here. So the actual amount now being paid for overtime is as a result of the reduction in staff.
It's a reduction in staff and also a matter of tightening up the use of overtime.
How is that tightening up taking place? What effectively is being done?
Exactly what I just said to you, in which respect that whereas persons would be signed out for overtime by other staff members, that can't happen anymore. So
yeah, but what you said to me is that instead of a line staff signing, it now comes to you.
So a lot of it has to be pre-approved now.
It has to be pre-approved.
We have to have pre-approved overtime now.
So how does that affect the operations now?
It doesn't affect the operations, it's persons are not happy with a policy of that nature, but it's enforced.
So would it make sense for the working hours to be expanded, for example? No, it's not possible to include the amount of overtime that takes place. So you're saying that the normal working hour is 8 hours. What is the average overtime period being paid?
It's approximately about 4 hours. But for example, you have a driver split shift operation, for example, in which he will work for 10 hours. So he will come in the morning and we will split shift him, so we give him 2 additional hours and he comes back and takes the bus out for peak operations. So there are some split shift hours we have like that, but approximately about 4 hours is roughly in the average phase for overtime.
There is also mention of a reduction in costs associated with data collection. And there was mention made that there are certain operational deficiencies that were addressed, but there was no specific indication of what those deficiencies are. I'm just a little curious as to some of the deficiencies that were identified and how they were addressed. It speaks to data collection.
The digital point sheets. What we did, as we have been trying to do with the JUTC for a long time, is to have a cashless system and also to have a road monitoring system. When a bus leaves the depot at 6 o'clock or 5:30 in the morning, we really have no clue what the operation of that bus is until it rolls back in at 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock. And in our struggles to get a fleet monitoring system, we decided to introduce a point system through a tablet system. And what we did was we established point inspectors along various routes, which we have prior, who used to use a clipboard to register a bus that left Spanish Town and reached Central Village at a certain time. And then those point sheets would come in daily, because when you're running so many buses, so what we did was we transitioned into a tablet system. So as the bus leaves, so every point inspector has a tablet. So as the bus leaves the depot, it is recorded at its first point, its second point, its third point, until it reaches halfway tree, for example. So at this point now, we're able to reduce all the paperwork, and we were able to create the efficiency, because that point would require, say, half an hour. If at the end of that half an hour before that bus should arrive, if we don't see that, we now realize that there is an issue. Where is that bus? Is it broken down? Did the point did not reach its point? Was it rerouted? What happened at that? So we're able to create greater efficiency by moving the resources we had into areas that, for example, rerouting of buses. So we would reach a point at halfway tree, knowing downtown is very low. We would move that bus. Instead of moving that bus to Constance, we would say take it downtown immediately, because we understand there's a crowd at downtown right now. So we're able to create some efficiency out of using that tablet system. It's not the ideal system, but it was a system that we used in the interim of trying to get a fleet management system.
And I guess that directly related to now the savings in stationery.
Yeah.
Before you go, member, so Abrams, Portmore, especially the depot in Portmore, because a lot of reports you get about persons waiting for a very long time, up to an hour for a bus, a JUTC bus. Which, what is the required fleet that you would need to service Portmore efficiently, and what it is that you currently have now?
Portmore require approximately 130 units. One of the challenges with Portmore is that Portmore is a dormitory. So
Portmore is that where?
It's like a dormitory.
Oh, yes.
So
yes.
You're moving quite a mass of people in the morning and bringing them back from Kingston also. So where we would move that dormitory at between 5:30 or 6 to 8 o'clock, you have 2.5 hours to move a lot of persons. if you notice, the Portmore buses run empty virtually back and forth during the day. So your operation in Portmore basically comes down to 2 operations, morning and evening peak. And that is where you need your buses. Right now we are in the region of about 85 buses in the Portmore region. So there is and will be shortage of buses to move commuters until we get back up to that optional 120 minimum, or possibly 130. There is no shortage of commuters in Portmore. There's absolutely no
what is
shortage
the
of
fleet? I didn't
commuters.
hear
The
the
issue
fleet
is
that you have
shortage
now.
of buses.
85?
There's no shortage of commuters in Portmore. There's a shortage of buses in Portmore. And Portmore has always struggled over the years because it is such a confined movement of persons in a short period that you need those 130 buses in that morning to satisfy that movement. So if you are short of several buses, you now run into major delays and challenges for moving that, because it's just a lot of people in a matter of 2 hours. It's not spread out like Spanish Town. That Spanish Town traverses consistently.
Is that part of the franchise route that you have with private operators?
We have some franchise routes in Portmore, yes.
Still not able to fill
No.
the seat capacity?
Portmore just seems to keep growing and growing and growing. There's never a shortage of personnel. It is never a shortage of commuters. It's always a shortage of buses, and always been in Portmore.
But while there are no shortage of buses, there's no shortage of frustration either with the commuters. I get the complaints routinely. It's almost become normal now.
Yeah, I will agree with you, sir.
Mr. Abrams, from some time ago, because of that nature of the Portmore corridor, why the double, what you call the double buses?
Articulated.
The articulated buses were targeted for that area. And as I understand it from in the past, yes, that's a travel pattern in the mornings and in the evenings. So after about 9:30, thereabout in the morning, you have very little bus. Those buses were probably off the route until in the evening. So the operational cost should come down. Because there's a point in running a double-decker where it's 10 persons on it. So they'll come off the road almost all together, and you use smaller buses during that time. And probably you want to integrate the private coaster buses during that period when you don't have that high movement of persons. So I don't know if that has been abandoned, because the nature of the Portmore commuting pattern is long established, right? So you can plan accordingly in an efficient way, knowing how they behave. So I would just tell me if that is still in play or that has been abandoned. Because it shouldn't be a challenge, because we know it. We know it behaves.
The 2 dormitories basically are Spanish Town and Portmore. Mm-hmm. Portmore more so than Spanish Town. Along the Spanish Town corridor, you leave Spanish Town, you have Central Village, you have Duhaney Park, you have many stops along that corridor. So you're not particularly taking buses out of the system on those corridors. You still move quite a lot of persons in the morning from Spanish Town to Kingston. With Portmore, it's just morning and evening, and we concentrated on the articulated buses through those 2 dormitories, more so Portmore. So what we do periodically is move some of the articulated buses out of Spanish Town into Portmore into those peak hours. But we have mechanical challenges with those articulated buses.
I was just going to say those articulated buses are about 12 or more years.
Yeah, those are older buses.
Are you ordering anymore?
None have been ordered in this last batch of buses that have been ordered.
Because you need the volume, the space in those peak hours.
We have 2 buses that we call biotics, and those were 3 compartment buses. The articulated is 2 compartments, and the biotic is 3 compartments. Unfortunately, those biotics are 1998 and 2000. But when you're working with a dormitory like Portmore, you can pull that bus into halfway tree And you can clean halfway tree in one shot, because that bus will hold 200 persons at any given point. Unfortunately, they are very old, and we have a major challenge in
and
keeping them
we would
operating.
prefer the safety of the passengers.
Yes, and, you know, we have to be very careful with them, because the turnstile that allows this to meander like a worm, you would say, or like a snake. We have to be very careful with them. So they're basically out of commission right now. But yes, to answer your question, it is so. That's the type of unit that you require to move mass population in a short window, both morning and peak. And the truth is that you need something like a rail system, or you need something that can move a lot of people in a short window.
But
because running 130 buses, is not an easy thing to do back and forth in a very short time, because the traffic to go over. So a bus may cycle one time.
Sorry?
A bus may cycle one time, because of the traffic. Our cycle trips are to go and come. That's a cycle trip. That's one cycle trip, going and coming. But because of the traffic congestion, and you may not cycle that bus one time. That bus may not cycle it 2 or 3 times. It may cycle only one time, because it's sitting. If you look at Spanish Town, for example, on Boulevard, they're just sitting in traffic because they can't get to the lay-by to come back to halfway tree.
Let me ask though, as we touch on.
I just had one other last question to ask.
Well, remember you did a follow-up on my question.
Oh,
so
okay, I'll wait.
Yes, thank you. Looking at the public bodies, Mr. Abrams, two items that I know will affect, one, your operation, and two, the value of subvention that you get from central government, if it is doable. The fuel, because here, even though you are running out less buses in the last financial year, you have an increase of fuel of about 500 million, 2.16 billion. Yeah. And seeing the increase in fuel, how has that affected your operations, and just how it is that you budget on a monthly basis, seeing the volatility in the fuel prices? And second would be the toll. You're budgeting 194 million for toll. And seeing the increase, what will that mean? The increase that was just awarded or came in effect last Saturday, what increase would that put on your toll rate, your toll budget here now?
To speak of the fuel price, first of all, that we have really taken a hit with the fuel price, because we are seeing that our figures are moving almost 35% to 40% increase in fuel prices. And I would say the reduced bus runout has helped us in that aspect. But if we were in a position of running out 325 buses, we would have been we'd be at Ministry of Finance's door already. Let's put it that way. We'd be at the Ministry of Transport and Ministry of Finance's door already, because with the price of fuel that has escalated like that, we have taken a strong hit with that. Even in our current situation right now, even in our current situation of lower bus reduced runout, we are actually, I believe Finance has mentioned to me that our fuel allocation, based on the increase, will carry us till September or October of this year only. So we will have to meet with the Minister of Transport.
So you'll now have to know from September onwards how you finance
we'll have to
your
meet
fuel
with the Minister
operations.
We are actually in discussions, going to start discussions with the Minister of Transport to advise them that based on the fuel increase, which is of no... We would not even have known that putting out this budget together. We're going to be in a problem come September.
So we have better luck than the taxi drivers.
But as we speak about the fuel, because in the past you were not charged the SCT on fuel. I know it was added back to your fuel cost. Does that still remain, or
Yes.
where you have to?
No, that still remains.
That still remains, which is a big chunk of your cost too for fuel.
And so does duty on parts. So when we're allocated X for parts, duty
So I didn't hear that.
when we're allocated X for parts, duty comes out of that allocation too.
It is reduced from that allocation.
Yeah. The duty.
Oh,
So,
Chair, it goes back to the master plan that you asked
Yes.
from the ministry, because I would imagine that, things like these will be advocated for there to be either a reduction or waiver somewhat, because it is really in the interest of the government, or exemption. It is really in the interest of the government. But I want to also add on, because Mr. Abrams spoke just now about the issue with the Portmore dormitory, buses not being able to do the complete cycle. And he mentioned the rails. So is there a plan within the Ministry of Transport to try to incorporate that within that space in the maybe medium to long term to reduce the issue or the burden on the JUTC to impact that dormitory?
but before you answer, because I just want to finish up on the fuel. What percentage of your fuel costs are the taxes that?
approximately 30%.
30%?
30%. Percent, yeah.
Of your
Approximately
fuel
30%.
costs, the taxes that are.
Yeah.
That's heavy. No, well, you used to purchase from Petrojam. You are now purchasing from private.
From private entities, yes.
Private entities.
But we consistently do cost analysis to ensure that
You get the best price.
yeah, best price from various marketing companies.
And this 2.16, when you're getting your subvention, is it less the taxes or everything, and then you have to pay back over the taxes?
Include the taxes, yes.
So before I touch on the toll, in the 2020-21 public bodies estimates, there was a $4.422.9 billion, which is interest and penalty write-off, which should have been done. Has that been done? Because I know up to last financial year it was delayed. It had not been done. But has it now been done?
Yes, the write-off went through.
It is completed now.
Yes,
Okay. And that was for statutories and other taxes
yes,
owed to the government.
yes.
All right. They told Mr. Abrams. You have here $194 million on toll. Seeing that there's an increase that came into effect on Saturday, how would that now impact on the JUTC?
I think we might be able to balance it because we have less buses going through the toll. Again, if we were at the optional fleet, we would have major challenges, but because we have less units operating through the toll now, we may be able to balance and at least ride the storm out.
So basically what you're doing over there is juggling.
JUTC has always been juggling.
But all right, so you're able to, but if you had a full rollout, have you calculated what that additional cost would be? Or what is it what was the additional cost on a monthly basis with what you have? Do you have that calculation?
No, I don't have that calculation on hand.
Right.
No. If you had the optional fleet running, what that would be? It would be pretty significant.
No, you see PSY said we basically give basket to carry water. Because if you have to juggle, just depends on how you balance their books in how the rollout is done. Is not acceptable for the traveling public or even the taxpayers who are subsidizing.
Just preliminary, currently we're looking at probably about 600,000 per week.
$600,000 per week,
Yeah.
addition
Yeah, current
to the toll.
Yeah, this current.
Yes, the current rate
our
now.
current situation right now. Yeah.
As a result of the increase. Yeah, well. Sir Pierce, it's over to you, Go ahead, member.
Question, both Pierce and Mr. Abrams. It's a non-operational question. Public order, mainly at your terminal points, particularly like halfway tree. We have always maintained that one of the challenges we have in the country is public order, and where we as a country can begin to make some impact is in public transportation. Now, you are a state-owned entity, and I believe it provides the greatest opportunity for the state to intervene. What is public order? For example, when they go at the Alpha Tree terminal or any one of the queues and the insistence of the queues. I visited the Alpha Tree terminal few years ago, and I was a bit impressed with a certain amount of order that existed in the depot with people taking the bus. My question is, to what extent are we having and insisting on that kind of practice in the depot? One. Question two, the security that exists in those terminal places. Do we have incidents of robbery, hold-ups, stick-ups, whatever like that? What is the level of security that exists in those places?
As you know, Halfway to Transport Center is assigned to the Transport Authority. What we have done at the JUTC is, prior to COVID, I had aligned a security company that would control the loading of the buses by personnel. So instead of everybody charging into the bus, we had them lined up, and the security would allow one person at a time to go in. Hence, to assist the driver in collecting his fare and using the card instead of 3, 4, 5 people on the stairs going up to him. The level of discipline in the center, there are some challenges in there. We are now in discussions with the Transport Authority as to how we can correct some of the. We're not having any robberies, or what we're having is a lot of school children congregating in the center, and it becomes a playground for them per se right after school. So we are in discussions with the High Command also and Transport Authority to move these children out of the center as quick as possible by taking the buses, because they'll come into the center and they won't take the buses. They'll just be in the center and for 2-3 hours. Meantime, buses are leaving consistently, which should be taking them. So a lot of them are stuck behind, and then they put additional pressure on the system, because when they're ready to leave at 4 o'clock, 4:30, you're talking about adults ready to go home at that time also. But with respect to any sort of robberies or anything like that, we don't have any information of anything in that category happening. What we do have is a lot of indiscipline of children, and the adults we have no problem with the adults. And we only have those issues during school period. And on the non-school periods, we don't have any challenges like that. Downtown is a different aspect, because
It's outside.
downtown, you have a lot of volatile areas downtown in Parade, South Parade, North Parade. But we don't have, per se, activities affecting the JUTC. Activities that affect the JUTC are around. If a shooting takes place or something like that, and a road is blocked off and we have to reroute or something like that. But with respect to JUTC itself, the answer would be no.
Okay. Just one little passing observation. I don't like the term loading the bus. I'd rather use embarking.
Disembark and embark.
Disembarking and embarking.
We have words like that we use a lot.
But I don't want us, as a public body, no, we have to set the tone.
Yeah.
And we have to start somewhere. This cargo-like treatment of people, I think even the language can help to cement that mentality. We are not cargo. We came here from Africa as cargo, but that stopped. So we are passengers embarking and disembarking.
We call them commuters.
Commuters, yes.
One last question in relation to the stoning of buses. I know that, it's the last one for me. I know that the JUTC has been impacted where the stoning of buses are concerned over the years. Are we seeing a reduction? No, I've heard a PR, public relations campaign going around, which, when I heard it, I was like, it was very good. But I wanted to know how impactful that has been on your fleet.
We had a very bad spell late last year going into early this year. And the spell was in the 3 miles area. It's beyond me why they stone buses in the last 15 years at JUTCs. For some reason, they take their frustrations out on the bus company. Yeah. So we have tried several times, and wherever we find the hot spots, we engage the high command in that area. They assist us as best as possible. We took it one step further now, and that we have engaged Crime Stop with a reward system should anybody be brought to justice for. Well, no, but the stonings have also stopped. The stonings have also stopped, which has costed us quite a bit of money. Quite a bit of money it has costed us. Because, when you stone a bus and break a windshield, if there's not one in stock, that bus is grounded. It cannot go out. So it's a double-edged sword for us.
Just a final. The cost between CNG and diesel, with seeing the volatility in the market now, is it still working out as a more cost-effective?
Yes, I think one of the benefits of the CNG program was the manner in which the Minister of Transport negotiated the framework agreement. And one of the benefits, I believe, also is the second tranche of CNG buses that may possibly come through the original framework agreement. I think the supplier is held to a figure that was agreed upon from day one.
Okay, but so what caused the delay on that second tranche of buses?
I think the ministry is actively pursuing it right now.
Because those were in the original framework.
Yeah, they're in the original framework agreement.
Because the first tranche, was it at a cost to the government? Those basically came with the agreement. Yeah.
The first tranche actually came, JUTC didn't have to put out any money up front. And so that's the first 5 buses. The next 20 buses, the agreement actually contemplated that the supplier of the fuel would contribute towards the purchase of each bus, and the bus would have been purchased by the government of Jamaica. But that we indicated to them at that stage that we would want it on similar terms as the first tranche of 5 buses.
Hence why the
because
delay.
we didn't have any money, right?
Hence
so
why
they went to market. They have come back with proposal now that is similar to the first 5
When
buses.
you expecting to tie this up?
Well,
the reason why I'm asking, PS, because, I mean, by your own report, you see the savings. It's up to 40% compared to the diesel buses, right? Even though you have other El Hydro system. But if you have a favorable response to the buses, then why not then continue on that route with even some of the ones that you're purchasing now, since they are available out there also,
Right.
And go the diesel route. You know, so I'm trying to figure out what has really caused the delay between the supplier and why not then purchasing, since you're purchasing buses now.
The matter is now before Cabinet. That's the 20 buses for approval.
Okay.
We did have some miscommunication from the supplier. They had written us earlier this year expressing terms that were different from what we anticipated, and we had to seek clarification from them. But the matter is before Cabinet now for approval. So we anticipate those 20.
The supplier was trying to bail on you.
Well, not really, not really.
Yeah,
they were using a term that finance didn't like. We're not borrowing any money to buy these buses. They were supposed to supply the buses, and the fuel transactions would pay for them.
Even though we haven't gotten the electric buses, I'm sure a cost analysis must have been done for us to want to try it. You have any idea of what it will cost us over the diesel buses in savings? Or are you waiting until those buses get here?
Well, I wouldn't venture into that. I don't know the extent to which Mr. Abrams have done that kind of analysis, but one of the major plus will be the total elimination of the pilferage of fuel.
Find something else to take.
And maintenance, lower maintenance, of course.
But even though the maintenance, I mean, you're now going to have to go train new technicians to deal with these buses. They're more technical than the regular buses. The replacement of batteries still have not gone down to the extent that the cost is low. So, I mean, if not managed properly, it can end up costing you more for the maintenance of one bus compared to a regular diesel bus. So even though you're trying to get rid of the other things, you might end up worse off if we're not careful.
Well, yes. Higher level of training and skills.
And you've been losing a lot of your engineers.
That's what Mr. Abrams didn't tell you, that in the attrition that he has been suffering, significant amount of them are actually highly trained and highly skilled mechanics, which, they are very difficult to replace. As we train them, they seem to be gobbled up by first world country. Yes.
Sorry, Rams.
Just to say on the cost savings for the EV units, I think if we manage the process properly, there will be significant savings, fuel being one. The level of operation will determine how efficient, how the cost savings will play out, from maintenance-wise also. I think it's still safe to say that there will be significant savings, but there's training that has to be done, as you said. We're not sure the battery capacity life, we're not sure the warranty components. So I think that all in all, the analysis of the 5 buses will determine how do you move forward with a change in technology like that. And I think that's where Barbados may have had a little problem, because they changed their entire fleet overnight and now they're experiencing.
Learn from that experience.
They're teething all the problems of our entire fleet, versus we will teeth the problems on maybe 5 buses.
And why I ask the question to both of you is just, I hope that we don't treat it in a similar way as we do treat the fleet that we have now. Not able to get the parts, not able to, because just my little knowledge of it is that it is much more expensive for maintenance if you allow it to run down. Yeah? And it can't be that when the JUTC asks for X amount for it, we're penny pinching, and then in the long run end up spending more in trying to bring it back to something that is usable. So again, it comes back down to policy on how you treat the JUTC.
I think one of the things that we are going to have to be very cognizant is the cost of charging these batteries, the JPS component of charging these batteries. What I have asked for in a test component is to use a solar system in charging these batteries. But how do we charge these batteries? Are they a full run in the night? Is it a short charge in the day? Is it a short charge in, you know, and so the cost to charge these units in the night will also be part of the KPIs as to how we determine how do you transition into this level of technology now.
Yeah, virgin territory. All right, thank you, Mr. Abrams. Members, are there any final? No? All right, let me thank PS Dr. Dawkins and Mr. Abrams and the team for, even though a few months late, but we are here. Dr. Hales, I hope that by the end of the year we will hear something more concrete, as we can't keep going down this road. And for the JUTC itself, it is an institution that ought to be saved. That's my view. And it is one that, if we're going to save it, we have to change how it is that we focus on it and we operate. So I'm hoping that you promised. That's why I made you say it, so that Hansard can catch you. I can refer back to Hansard that you did say it. By the end of the year, we hear something concrete.
Just one last thing from Mr. Hales. Those buses we are about in Montego Bay, that has been resolved. The buses that were, they call bailiff seized. I only heard of it in the press, so I have to ask you. That 2 buses were seized for some outstanding debt that was belonging to that metro.
Mr. Abrams would like to answer.
I think the PSB have been out of office at that time when it happened. However, we were able to intervene and have the matter settled, and the buses were returned back to the JUTC, and the liability was taken care of.
That for me, yes. Dr. Hales, was most unfortunate. You know why of unfortunate? It's 2 government agencies. 2 government agencies. It should never happen. If there's an outstanding debt to be settled, it must be resolved in the meeting room between 2 government agencies. That contention never belong out there.
And this is not the first time we've seen some
Ministry of Health and UDC.
Yes.
And to see it happen again with 2 state agencies is unfortunate.
And well, I'm glad you raised it, but the Montego Bay Metro is another meeting by itself, because that in itself is less than 20% of the buses needed. Yeah. So at another time we can delve more into the Montego Bay Metro, but yeah. All right. Thank you, sir. Thank you, team.
Sir.
All right, members. Item 7. Any other business? We have I would imagine that Parliament will be going on summer recess soon. Yeah. We need to look at the next meetings. Madam Clerk, was the request from Ministry of Education sent out, the questions? All right. We haven't gotten the approval for the questions that we had that was put by the consultant and other members. Yeah, remember the Ministry of Education no, you did, but others didn't. So I am putting it to the committee now that all right, so.
What I said, Chair, was that we can use it as,
Yeah. All right. Yeah. So what we will do is have those circulated, and then we see after the summer break how soon we can get we are taking that as a decision now. Yes. And then after the summer break, at least they will have adequate time in dealing with. and just take into consideration also the back to school. So I would say later down in September, after school is fully in session, then we bring the Ministry of Education. But in the meantime, we'll ask them to prepare the answers to the questions that we have said.
Chair, there was a request made by me for the Ministry of Labor. I think it was in relation to the senior citizens.
Yes, and you had posed the question also.
Maybe we could take them before the Ministry of Education
We
to
could.
give the Ministry of Education
Yes.
some time.
What I will ask the clerk to do is to recirculate your question, and if members have anything more to add to it, seeing that we're going to be bringing the ministry itself. So we can not just focus on that, but also a comprehensive report on where they are in the financial year, the programs that they have already embarked on, and their status overall, and then we can add that to it. Not a problem. So we take those two as a going concern at the start of the next session. All right?
Not to
No, go ahead.
cause any further due delay, but in the minutes there are some reports that should have come back to us. For example, maybe a follow-up in relation to the question that Member Jackson had with the BOJ. I'm not sure if there was anything,
No.
if there was a reply there.
Yes.
There,
Yeah, man.
I reminded the BOJ governor about something, and they had promised, and they said they forgot. But that is the contempt in which.
All right. What I will ask
Parliament.
Member Jackson is those questions just to just circulate them.
Yeah, okay.
All right. So that the clerk can send them off to.
and then, Chair, the arrears in relation to the bauxite industry.
All right.
Yeah, that
All right.
information was also supposed to be brought.
Oh, clerk is saying that she reminded the ministry as not. So let us just resend it back to them and get those responses. All right? All right. Thank you very much, members.
So moved.
Meeting adjourned.
Remember that big project the government announced them was going to from when? You ever catch yourself and wonder what happened to it? Stop wonder like an outsider and start move like the country belong to you. You have a right to publicly owned information, and the Access to Information Act gives you that power. I know you have enough questions about how government are run or not run, so let me show you how it works. Say mosquito spraying going on in your community, your